Yeah, so the World Bank has been active in exploring and supporting the use of educational technologies really for the last 30 years, perhaps even longer, starting initially with distance education, broadcast video, broadcast audio, radio and television. Over the last 15 years, we've become much more active in supporting countries as they explore how to use first things like computers in schools, and more recently a whole broad range of technologies. In addition to computers, now we're moving into tablets, mobile phones, interactive whiteboards, basically exploring how the various things that are happening in the technology sector might be relevant to countries as they try to meet some challenges that perhaps they've struggled to overcome even for decades. Yeah, mobile devices. If we're talking about phones, is a very basic challenge. They're not allowed to have them in schools. We have about 55 countries around the world we've seen actually have bans on the use of mobiles in schools for lots of understandable reasons. But we do say to ministries of education, if you're thinking about huge investments in educational technologies in your schools, and at the same time students are showing up with increasingly powerful computers in their pockets or in their pocketbooks that go by the name of mobile phones, maybe you should be thinking about how you can integrate in some of the technology that already exists with some of the technology you plan to buy. Yeah, well, I mean, the technology is only as good as your educational system. Technology is only as good as your teacher. The technology is only as good as the engagement level of your learner. What we've seen, unfortunately, in many cases, is that those systems, those schools, those teachers, and those students, the families, communities who are best able to take advantage of technology are those that already have numerous advantages. Where you see the top quintile of teachers oftentimes can make pretty good use of technology, whereas the bottom half of teachers oftentimes it's a distraction, or even it makes things or life more difficult for them in the classroom. So there's a very real danger. While there are opportunities to decrease various divides or inequities in society through the use of technologies, as a practical level we're seeing very real challenges related to equality of not only access but of impact. Yeah, what are the pros and cons of various, especially mobile technologies out there? Well, I mean, the pros are that they're there, they're being used. People know how to use them. Oftentimes mobile devices are easier to use. People are used to using them in their normal daily life. They're accessible outside of school, so that's a real pro. You don't need to spend the time teaching people how to use a phone, for example, like you had to, or it's thought that you had to spend time teaching people how to use a computer. You know, what are the disadvantages of it? People think then it's easy. The technology's there, people know how to use it, so they'll know how to use it for education. They'll know how to use it to teach and to learn, and it isn't quite so simple. Yeah, so this issue of cheating and plagiarism is something that's made more acute oftentimes by the use of technology. One, because maybe it's easier to detect and it's easier to then punish because there's a digital paper trail, if you will. So there are definitely challenges. At the same time, there's an arms race happening on both sides, whereas cheating is perhaps enabled through the use of social media and collaborative technologies. It's also easier to catch. In addition, this whole idea of what it means to cheat or to plagiarize is perhaps being called into question, or at least challenged, because as we've seen with the scandal at Harvard University in the States earlier this year, where there was an emphasis on, or there are oftentimes an emphasis on collaboration and promoting student collaboration through the use of social media technologies. At the same time, this type of collaboration is actually against some of the anti-cheating or anti-plagiarism rules and procedures that are in place. I'm not saying that's good or bad, I'm just saying that it calls into question some of our approaches to both what it means to collaborate and what it means to cheat. This is a fact of life in the 21st century. These technologies evolve at their own pace. There's going to be both increased opportunities that they offer for students to do things perhaps that they shouldn't be doing, and offer increased opportunities for people to identify that these sorts of things are occurring, and then potentially to prove that they're occurring as well. Really, it is sort of a digital arms race, but this is a fact of life in the 21st century. And I think schools are challenged in many of their traditional approaches, not only related to cheating or plagiarism or these sorts of things, but all across the spectrum. I think this issue of cheating is just emblematic of some of the other challenges that are being made more acute because of the vast influx of technologies in school and the use of technologies outside of school in ways oftentimes that educators and education systems haven't thought of in advance. Yeah, so this issue of memorization, so many education systems around the world are based on rote memorization. And there's one thing a computer can do well, it's provide access to various facts and figures. So the emphasis on rote memorization really becomes less important. It's something we've always thought should be less important anyway. But it's not only the access to information, even just basic calculation as well. Whereas in mathematics education, where computers can calculate certain things well, but the concepts behind why you make certain calculations, how you make them, how you critically evaluate the results or even decide on what approach to take, those are the types of things that computers can't replace, but they can enable you to not spend as much time on it, whether it's basic calculations or basic memorization of facts and figures. Of course you need some of that as well, but allow you to spend time on what is really critical engagement with whatever subject or whatever challenge or problem that you're confronted with, and perhaps use your mind for what it's best at and leave for the computers to do what they're best at. This is my first Online Educa Berlin. I don't traditionally participate in events like this in North America or Europe because of our concentration on middle and low income countries. I've just met a lot of very interesting people doing some very interesting things and getting a European perspective on approaches to things like content management systems. Digital content especially has been interesting to me to see. There's been a lot of investment in this area in Europe over the last 10 to 15 years, and to see how it's evolved. Many middle and low income countries look, for better or for worse, to European examples to see how they might orient themselves and where they want to go in the future. That orientation may or may not always be useful to them, but sort of my participation here at Online Educa Berlin helps me to better figure out what might be relevant or what experiences I might want to share with other places around the world to see where there might be relevance and where there might be eventual impact.